Hello, everyone. Today we have on the agenda the Interreg specific objective, better Interreg governance, or also better cooperation governance, which is based in Article 14 of the draft ETC regulation. And we are happy that we have now 4 colleagues from DG Regio with us to explain a bit what the new Interreg specific objective is about. That is Nathalie Verskalde, Olivier Baudelet, and Ricardo Ferreira from the Unit D2, and Simona Polova from Unit D1. Thank you very much, and I would like to pass the floor to Nathalie.
Yes, thank you very much, Bernard and colleagues in Interact. And welcome to everyone to this second online seminar or training after we had a successful trial with PO5. I hope you're all healthy, that you're slowly getting out of lockdown. As you can see, I have shorter hair than last time, so this is due to our gradual deconfinement in Belgium. And again, I would like to thank the colleagues in Interact for putting all the efforts into making these types of events possible. Yes, so first of all, an important warning, as I did for PO5. We are using information in this presentation which dates back from before the breakout of the COVID-19 pandemic. Not much has happened since then for the ETC regulation post-2020 because so much has happened on the other front of fighting COVID and of course also preparing a substantial recovery package. So we are basing our information on pre-COVID times as far as ETC is concerned. And then the second warning I wanted to share with you is that it is based on a common understanding between the institutions involved in the negotiations, Parliament, Council, and Commission. We have what we call common agreements, draft text, which is already agreed, but that does not cover everything. Not every single word is agreed. The mechanics are not yet very stable, plus anything connected even remotely to the MFF is also not yet discussed and agreed. So there are still some uncertainties, although less for ISO 1 than for PO5. And we would again advise you to use the time we have ahead of us to really think, consider, reflect, consult, look at examples, look at information that exists, and be inspired to prepare your program. Next slide, please. Sorry, I'm in the office. Maybe you haven't noticed. Last time I was at home, I'm in the office now, so there's a little bit more noise. A reminder that really one of the main things about Interreg post 2020 is that we really would like to move away from approaching Interreg as if it was a little bit standalone, disconnected, or a bit in a vacuum. Not to say that everybody does that, of course, far from it, but we do have, all of us, a little bit of a tendency to live in our Interreg bubble and to maybe forget a little bit about the outside world. And we would really like to make an effort next time to link our programs better to the socioeconomic and the territorial environment in which we operate. And here on the slide, you can see reference to a few of the more strategic, let's say, frameworks that are already in place and that really you should be using in order to embed Interreg into them for more effective action. In my unit, it's quite obviously the linkage to the 2017 communication boosting growth and cohesion in EU border regions and all the work that we have been doing the past 6 years on legal and administrative obstacles, for instance, including with the setting up of a specific team here in D2 called the Border Focal Point. You will hear more from that later in the presentation. We also have, of course, the legal tools that we very much want to promote, the existence of EGTCs, for instance, in cross-border region, but also for transnational cooperation, and the new proposal for a mechanism to overcome legal obstacles. These are all very important elements that you need to take into account when planning future action under ISO 1. For the external borders, for both EPA and NEXT or NDICI, we have existing policy frameworks there, in which Interreg needs to embed. The same for the outermost regions. There has been also a communication in 2017 that provides very concrete lines of action. And then, of course, let's not forget about the macro-regional strategies, the sea basin strategies, and their related action plans. So all this to say that we don't want to operate simply as Interreg, as if we were islands. We are not. And it's a very, very important point for ISO 1. I now give the floor to Olivier, who will take you through ISO 1 in more detail.
Thank you, Nathalie. Indeed, what we will try to do now is to give you an overview of ISO 1. What is ISO 1 in the first part? What can be done with ISO 1 in the second part? And finally, very concretely, how to program ISO 1 in the next generation of Interreg programs. That will be followed by a focus on more specific cases, the cross-border obstacles, the macro-regional strategies, the external borders, and the outermost regions. But let's start with what is actually ISO 1. So the information that you have on this slide is based on the Trilogues, so it's the latest information, it's up to date. And the first thing to notice is that the name has changed. In the Commission proposal, it was called Better Interreg Governance, and it's now called Better Cooperation Governance. And actually, the new name is better. It's better because what we want to achieve with ISO 1 is not so much about Interreg as programs, but it's really about governance. It's really about the governance of cooperation. So to oversimplify the things, but to present it in a structured way, we can say that with the Interreg programs, you would fund projects, mainly under PO 1 to 4. You would fund territories, mainly under PO 5, and you would fund governance under this ISO 1. Under ISO 1, we have 5 objectives that you see on the screen. The first one is to improve the institutional capacity. That's for the local authorities, for the administrations, for the stakeholders. The idea is that they know each other, that they understand how the other works, how it's organized, that they speak a common language, and finally that they share experiences so that cooperation can really be enriched by the neighboring regions. The second objective, and it's very important for cross-border, it's to reduce the obstacles. You know that the main obstacle to cross-border cooperation, certainly, but also for the other types of cooperation, is the fact that on the same territory, along the border, you have 2 different sets of legal and administrative rules. And the fact that the sets of rules are different makes cooperation rather complicated. So here, the objective is really to reduce or even maybe to eliminate these obstacles so that cooperation can be easier, and therefore more ambitious. The third objective is to have people-to-people actions, because citizens are really the starting point of cooperation. citizens need to know each other, they need to trust each other, and it's only if that works well that they will really want to do things together. So people-to-people actions are really important. Our aim is that, in the midterm or long term, generation after generation, the existence of the border in the minds of the people actually vanishes or disappears. The fourth objective is to use the ISO 1 to work on strategies. It can be macro-regional strategies, it can be sea basin strategies, it can be other types of strategies. And here it could be used to prepare the strategies or later on to implement them. And the fifth objective is specific to the external borders and to the outermost regions. And here it's really to promote the democracy, to promote the involvement of civil society in the cooperation activities, to contribute to the reform and democratic transitions, and also to have a more efficient public administration. So you see 5 objectives under ISO 1: institutional capacity, the obstacles, people to people, the strategies, and the external borders. Next slide, please. So now, what is expected with this ISO 1? Here, we really need to insist that it's not money which is taken away from the programs. In our discussions, many say, well, actually, you reduce our budget by 15%. But it's not what we want to do. It's not a matter of reducing the budget. On the contrary, it's money which is given to increase the impact of the different programs. Because we believe that improving cooperation governance has a high potential to improve the daily life of the citizens. For example, with ISO 1, you can improve the job market. You can improve the procedures to get a job. You can clarify the rules, and that's good for the citizens. You can also maybe reduce the commuting times across the border by having more coordinated time schedules, by having common pricing, common ticketing, and things like that. You can also maybe provide more health services to the citizens because they would, because of improved governance, have access to a wider health offer. So you see, ISO 1 is not money taken away, but it's money which is there to really improve the cooperation and really improve the daily life of the citizens. So with ISO 1, we can achieve a more profound, a more sustainable, a more structural change in cooperation. So to conclude, we need to insist that ISO 1 is of key importance for the Commission. As Nathalie said, we are now working more and more on cooperation as a policy, not only as a way to have projects, but as a policy as such. And ISO 1 is a key element. It's not because it's only 15% of the budget of a program that the impact will only be 15% of that program. On the contrary, because the activities we will finance do not cost a lot of money, with the 15%, you can actually achieve maybe a bigger impact than with the rest of the budget where you would just finance projects. So we really count on you to deliver on that. Next slide. So now, what can it be used for concretely? Next slide. So here are a few examples of what can be funded. It's not limitative, it's only examples. The first example is that ISO 1 can be used to facilitate the dialogue between the different actors in a cooperation area to agree on the problems and to try to find solutions. Bringing people together, basically. For example, if you want to work on on cross-border mobility, well, you need to bring together the transport operators, the users, the commuters, for example. You need to bring together also the municipalities, the regional level, and very often, as it's about transport, also the state, the national level. And therefore, if you want to improve things in mobility and in transport, you need to have the dialogue with a wide range of actors. And that's something that can be funded by ISO 1. The second type of activity, it's studies to better understand, for example, the obstacles and the processes. And linked to that, we can also fund with ISO 1 expertise to dig into the details. For example, you may need a lawyer to see what the obstacles for the labor market are, what are exactly the difficulties in terms of qualifications, in terms of labor law, in terms of pension rights. All that's many know there are difficulties, but you really need a lawyer to dig into the detail and to see what exactly poses problem. And that can be funded by ISO 1. You may need also an IT expert. For example, if you want to harmonize IT systems for the reimbursement of health expenditure, well, you need an IT expert, and that can be funded by ISO 1. Then you can also fund pilot projects, because once you have done the studies, you have hired the expert, you want to try whether what you have in mind really actually works in practice in the real world. So you want maybe to do a pilot project. You can also use ISO 1 to exchange experiences, to share solutions, and hence to increase the impact of your policies. You could also use it to organize trainings, peer reviews, staff exchanges, and that contributes to institutional capacity. You can also use ISO 1 to collect data, because if you want to have a good public policy, obviously it has to be evidence-based, and the evidence is data. And very often you have the data at the national level, sometimes at the regional level, rarely at the NUTS-3 level, and even more rarely at the cross-border or transnational levels. So it's important to develop this data to have cross-border or transnational policies. And finally, you can also use ISO 1 for people-to-people actions and to promote the citizens' cooperation. Next slide. That's a question that programs ask very often. Can ISO 1 be used to finance infrastructure? And clearly, no, it's not the objective of ISO 1. Huh? The objective of ISO 1 is to improve cooperation governance. For infrastructures, you have the POs 1 to 5. The ISO 1 is really, again, for governance. And it's clear that an infrastructure as such is not improving governance. It's the activities around the infrastructure which are improving governance, but the infrastructure as such is not improving governance. Therefore, equipment or small investments are only possible if they are of a minor or a complementary nature than the rest of what you are funding. And if you can clearly demonstrate that these equipments or small investments contribute to an improved cooperation governance. Next slide. Now, a few words about the links between ISO 1 and the current pandemic. There has been a study from the OECD showing that the pandemic has a clear regional impact. So the situation is not the same from one region to another. And therefore, there is a clear need for a better regional and even local response to the pandemic. And here the ISO 1 can be very useful. It can be useful to coordinate the actions, for example, across the borders to minimize the crisis management failures. For example, to ensure that there is a good availability of hospital beds across the borders, to have the information basically where are beds still free, and to organize the movement of patients, and all that really it's governance. And also to reduce the negative spillover effects of the pandemic, for example, to reduce the negative impact on the frontier workers who commute every day. And the same goes, of course, also at the external borders of the EU. In that regard, ISO 1 would then come in complement or together with everything which is already done through the CRI, the CRI Plus, the IPA CRI, the ENI CRI, and also the Team Europe packages. So ISO 1 comes in complement to all these other things that we do. Next slide. So now, how to program ISO 1? How to have ISO 1 in the programs themselves? I'm sure you know, but the references and the regulations are mentioned here. It's mainly the articles 14 and 15 of the ETC regulation. I guess you all know it by now also, but at the start we had a few questions. ISO 1 is not technical assistance. Technical assistance is to be used for the management of the program, and ISO 1 is to be used for a policy, for an activity, which is to improve the cooperation governance. So the two are different. Then ISO 1 has the status of a policy objective. So it's at the same level. So we have the 5 policy objectives mentioned as such in the regulation, to which there is a 6th, which is the ISO 1, which is also therefore sometimes called PO6. Like every policy objective, it has specific objectives, and here it's very logical. At the start, I said that under ISO 1, you have 5 objectives. Therefore, it's logical you have 5 specific objectives, to which we have added a 6th one, which is to give flexibility if you want, because it's a 6th specific objective for other activities. So logically, you have a specific objective on institutional capacity, one on the obstacles, one on the people-to-people, one on the strategies, one for the external borders, and as I said, a 6th one for the other activities. Next slide. In terms of budget, it's not clear yet. The Commission has proposed 15%. The Parliament has proposed up to 15%. The Council has proposed at least 10%. So we don't know yet, but it's likely that it will be between 10 and 15%. However, for the interregional and for the interregional programs, so for example, Interact and ESPN, there it's 100% of the funds which are for ISO 1, because these programs are really there to improve the better cooperation governance. Next slide. So how to do it in the programming? Huh? The simplest option is to have a separate priority axis for cooperation governance. A separate priority axis, don't mix it among the other one. Make it simple, one specific objective, one priority axis on governance. And you can also implement that priority with a small projects fund, and that could be an interesting combination. Like every axis, you would need indicators and targets. I will come back to it in the coming slides. Of course, the indicators and the targets need to be related to what you really want to achieve. They should really show what you want to do with the funds under ISO 1. Obviously, the targets need to be realistic and also measurable. Regarding intervention codes, we don't have them yet, but they may come later. Next slide. So here are the slides about the indicators. Just to give you some ideas, I will not go through them individually because you will receive the slides. But basically, we present them for the obstacles, for the people-to-people activities, for institutional cooperation, for macro-regional strategies. It's important to know also that the links between the output indicators and the result indicators are recommendations. You may also use other indicators. Just to give you some examples, on the obstacles, you could have as an output indicator something about the solutions for the legal and administrative obstacles, and as a result indicator, the number of obstacles which have been alleviated or resolved. Another example for the people-to-people cooperation, and that would be the next slide. You could have the organizations, the number of organizations cooperating across the border as output indicator, and the number of organizations cooperating across the border after the project completion as a result indicator. For the macro-regional strategies, and that's the next slide, you could, as an output indicator, look at the number of organizations cooperating in the macro region, and as a result, the number of solutions which have been taken up or scaled up by these organizations in the frame of the macro regional strategy. Next slide. And here you also have other possible indicators, which again, you can play around because these are just recommendations. Next slide. So now we have seen a little bit how ISO 1 would work. And as I said, we will focus at this stage about some specific cases, cross-border obstacles, macro-regional strategies, external borders, and outermost regions. And we start with the cross-border obstacles, and I give the floor to Ricardo.
Thank you, Olivier. So we have been talking a lot about cross-border legal and administrative obstacles. We call them obstacles of a legal or administrative nature that impede cross-border interaction. And sometimes it is not that clear what exactly are we talking about. So perhaps the best solution is to provide a bit of a frame, what has been done in the past, how have we achieved this, and how has this lead us to put so much emphasis on this type of obstacles. In 2015, most of you have seen it. We have conducted this cross-border review. It was a major exercise of consultation, a study, an inventory of obstacles, several stakeholders workshops, which have shown us one important lesson, which is cross-border obstacles do matter because there is a border effect. This border effect, we talk about, next slide please, we talk about border effect or unused potential in cross-border regions, is the mere fact that because there are borders, although there is a single market, the differences in legal frameworks, like Olivier was saying, the different sets of legislation in one side and the other side of the border, hamper people, hamper organizations, hamper businesses from exchanging across the border. We have been able to identify this border effect, this unused potential, with this number that you see there. If we would be capable to remove only 1/5 of all these legal and administrative obstacles, we could expect an increase in GDP of 2% in these border regions. 2% of GDP is not precisely peanuts. We are talking about 1 million new jobs. This shows why intervening in these cross-border legal and administrative obstacles is so important. Next, that's why we have come up with this communication in 2017. Natalie has referred to it, boosting growth and cohesion in border regions, which has led us to 10 actions, to an action plan of 10 areas, in which we, to an action plan with 10 areas, in which we have identified a few areas where these obstacles are more permanent, are of a more emergent need to intervention. Only a few examples we include here, for example, healthcare. The type of obstacles that we can see in some borders are frequently common in several other borders. Questions like, why can't individuals go to the nearest hospital if it is across the border? Or questions that seem to be so surreal. Why can't ambulances cross the border? Frequently, this type of questions lay on the differences between the legal frameworks. The legal framework setting the healthcare system on one side of the border is different from the legal framework setting the healthcare system on the other side of the border. And those incompatibilities sometimes prevent this natural interaction. If I have an accident, I want to be taken to the nearest hospital, regardless of is it across the border or not. Another sector in which we frequently identify problems is on transport. How can we ensure cross-border public transport? Because in most cases, we can easily observe that transport networks and public transport services are designed to serve a territory which is limited by border. If we have natural interactions of people across the border, why can't we have these transport networks operating as easily as they do within the same country? A third example is employment. Why many times we see that the lack of information for commuters, for those people who opt to live in one side of the border while working on the other side, prevents that they find a job on the other side. Sometimes this possibility of enhancing cross-border commuting, this possibility to enhance the capacity for people to keep residing on their place of residence while working on the other side, could be a major development improvement for both sides of the border. These are just examples of problems that we see frequently on different borders with different natures, with different specificities, but that the lesson here is these problems do hamper the development of border regions. And sometimes we just need to solve those tiny little details to unleash this potential that was unused. Next slide, please. So what have we been doing since the communication with this border focal point team that Natalie has commented before? We have 3 pieces of information that could be important for you to take a look at when preparing your programs. We have on the first side this COM 2017-534, the communication, which gives us the legal and the the legal, social, and economic frame. This comes from the cross-border review. The cross-border review, which I've commented in the previous slide, was the setting up, was the gathering of information that allow us to get to the communication. And from that, one of the actions in that 10-point action plan is this B-Solutions pilot project. With these B-Solutions, what we are trying to do is precisely to demonstrate that this type of legal and administrative obstacles that hamper cross-border interactions can be solved if we build up the trust, if we can sit the different stakeholders at the same table to find the solution that's adequate for the problem. Looking at these three groups of information, we see that they give us different sources of knowledge. Next, the first is the communication is quite interesting to demonstrate the why. The political framework, the social framework, the economic framework. It demonstrates a bit in further detail why do we need to intervene in cross-border obstacles. The second one is the cross-border review, which gives us a set of examples of real obstacles. In this cross-border review, there was a study that created an inventory of obstacles. It's a bit updated. It's a bit outdated. It can be updated continuously because we are always finding new different obstacles that appear. The more that different border regions exchange with each other, the more they find the different obstacles that they face. But they give us examples of obstacles that many of them could be found in most of the borders within the European Union member states. The third example is the B-Solutions that gives us examples of solutions. What have we done with these B-Solutions pilot projects was piloting a very costless, almost costless pilot projects where we have funded more than 40 specific cases with a very low investment involved. With these 40 cases were presented by different stakeholders in border regions for a specific problem they faced, to which we have given a contribution that created the routes to allow finding solutions. Some of these pilot projects are very specific for a given territory, but some of them could be replicable elsewhere. If we start looking at those examples, we start seeing that many of those obstacles are felt elsewhere and could be examples for your programming. But this is not all. Next please. If we start looking at different outputs of the work we have been doing, we see that there are other sources of real obstacles. We have created this healthcare study with the support of DG Santé, which showed how much cross-border cooperation is there in the healthcare sector. It illustrates different cases and it identifies common obstacles that are frequent to appear. We have seen in the connectivity, we have seen the missing rail links, identifying where the connectivity could be, cross-border connectivity could be improved. With the support of ESPAN, ESPAN has done the cross-border public services study that showed us the different types of public services that appear across the border, and this can only appear based on the trust, based on solving different border obstacles. But this is not all. If we look at different countries, we see different national and regional initiatives that are showing different examples of obstacles. So one main message that could come out from today on this example of cross-border obstacle is there is plenty of information. Cross-border obstacles do matter. They need to be solved and they are felt everywhere. So we have the scope to intervene and with small investment, like Olivier was saying, perhaps with a small amount of money, a lot can be done, a lot of impact can be introduced to border regions. Next. What is the approach? What are the lessons learned from our experience with these solutions? To solve border obstacles, the first thing that we need is to build trust and to identify those obstacles. Frequently, if we talk with different stakeholders, there is that feeling that we have an obstacle, we assume it cannot be solved, it has always been there, it is like this, it goes beyond our competencies, it cannot be addressed. We frequently have this feeling. If in a structured way we can build trust amongst the different stakeholders and identify these obstacles, and here is one of the starting points of how can Interreg seriously intervene on identifying these obstacles, mapping them. What is the legal nature impeding the interaction? For this type of obstacles, what are the actors that could be brought into solving them? This is the part of understanding the details. If we can work on the process of doing thorough inventories of obstacles, thorough inventories of stakeholders that should be involved in the solutions, then we can pass to the next phase, which is working together to find those common solutions. This can and should be funded by the Interreg-specific objective number 1. There is scope. The knowledge that we have shows us that we have different obstacles to identify. In this slide, we only add a few examples from our learning, but do not limit yourselves to the ideas that are identified in this slide. Please do take a look at these solutions, do take a look at the cross-border review, do take a look at lots of different sources of inventories of cross-border obstacles and what is being implemented on other borders. Some examples: to support cross-border employment, sometimes it's just needed to facilitate access to labor market across the border, identifying vacancies, making them accessible. Frequently, job seekers and employers do not know where the other are. Sometimes to promote cross-border accessibility, we just need to build joint mobility plans. We just need to bring together the authorities with competence to public transports on both sides and develop and make those mobility plans compatible one with the other. To facilitate cross-border public administration, we need to bring together those administrations and ensure interoperability of systems. Sometimes things so simple like cross-border citizen card, which is recognized by both sides of the border on public services in both sides of the border, facilitates so much the access to public services in the cross-border region. For providing information to citizens, sometimes it is the need to ensure access for information for commuters that is specifically designed for commuters. Sometimes for promoting multilingualism, it's the issue of promoting the knowledge of the language of my neighbor, not just the learning English. Sometimes for pooling healthcare facilities, the problem lies in recognition of systems, on having agreements between the different health insurance systems, ensuring that it's easier and smoother to recognize the patient and the patient can access healthcare on both sides of the border. Sometimes the issue is with data and evidence. Sometimes we need to understand how are people moving, why, what are the effects on housing, etc., etc. Next slide, please. Summing up, just one detail, all this information is available. If I would sum up what I want to pass, is simple. Cross-border obstacles do matter, and there is the scope for intervention. And this intervention may have a very significant impact in cross-border regions if we can tackle those easy cross-border obstacles. All this information is available on this platform. You have there the link, you have there the QR. And one last detail, this is not an information platform from the Commission to the stakeholders. This is seriously an invitation to share your experiences. This platform is meant for everyone to learn from the experience elsewhere. So please do share your experiences, do go there, do see what we have made available and what your peers have also made available. Thank you. Now I pass to Simona.
Okay, hello everybody as well from my side, from Regio D1 unit, which deals with transnational and interregional cooperation programs, with programs on EU external borders and in the outermost regions, as well as with enlargement issues. And I will speak today about what can we program under Interreg specific objective 1 for transnational cooperation programs, the programs on EU external borders and in the outermost regions. So we start with the slide which says focus on the macro-regional strategies implementation. This is true, but actually we are going to speak about mainly, about transnational cooperation, and macro-regional strategies implementation is one of the prominent actions which can be supported by the transnational cooperation programs. If you can give me the next slide, please. So what can transnational cooperations programs support under so-called ISO 1? Well, according to the latest Trilogue text and the compromise text, the transnational cooperation programs can indeed support the whole range of activities which are foreseen by the cross-border cooperation and which have been now presented by my colleagues from the D2 unit. But the regulation foresees also specific actions under the Article 14.4b. And these specific actions are indeed the support to the governance of the macro-regional strategies, of the sea basin strategies, and the Council also added the support to the other territorial strategies than the two mentioned. On the slide, you see listed the 4 macro-regional strategies which are adopted by the Council and coordinated and facilitated by the Commission, namely by DG Regio, as well as 3 sea basin strategies, which are coordinated by our colleagues in DG Mare. You can as well see the mention of the General Affairs Council conclusions from 2014, which published a specific conclusions on the governance of macro-regional strategies. And this is specifically a text which should be taken into account when programming the ISO 1 for transnational cooperation programs. I will ask for the next slide. This General Affairs Council is an excellent source of inspiration because it covers the governance for macro-regional strategies from all sorts of different angles. But what is it very explicit on is that the key principle for the success of the macro-regional strategies implementation is the multi-level governance. And therefore, it is very explicit on mentioning that both or the EU level as well as the member states level, the national level and the regional level need to be covered in order for a macro-regional strategies implementation to be successful. So all the EU institutions, including the EU Parliament, should be on board. On the member states level, it should be both the national and the regional administrations, but it is also very important that the governance covers from the same perspective the member state as well as the non-EU countries which are participating in these strategies. The Council conclusions as well are listing the key stakeholders, and they mention that, that the relevant key implementers of the strategies need to be on board for the governance issues, such as the national coordinators, national contact points, priority area coordinators, and others. It also sets a principle of the tailor-made support, meaning that each and every of these strategies is very specific. It has a specific setup, the specific participation, and therefore the support needs to be tailor-made and take into account the specific conditions for each and every strategy. If you can give me the next slide, please. So what should transnational cooperation programs support when they support governance of the strategies? As I have said, the specific emphasis needs to be put on the support of the key implementers. At the same time, the bodies which are programming and implementing the macro-regional and sea basin strategies, and as well the territorial strategies which are mentioned. Of course, among all the different actions for under governance, coordination should play a key role. It's the coordination with the EU programs, it's the coordination among the different bodies which are implementing the strategies, it's the coordination among the different strategies themselves. The programs should as well, or can as well, support coordination among themselves, among transnational cooperation programs. It is also very important to support the communication and raising of the awareness on the relevant strategies. This has been identified as one of the key bottlenecks and shortcomings in the implementation for the strategies. And it should be enhanced by the actions under the ISO 1. Thank you. The next slide, please. Here we are coming on the area of programs on EU external borders. So what do we mean by programs on EU external borders? It's on one hand, programs on the borders between member states and enlargement countries, Western Balkans and Turkey. So under the IPA legal framework, and on the other hand, for programs which are on EU external borders with the so-called neighborhood partner countries and Russia. I would ask for the next slide, please. What can then these programs on EU external borders do under Interreg Specific 1? Under Interreg Specific Objective 1. Well, again, they can do the full range of activities which are foreseen for internal cross-border cooperation. But at the same time, there are also specific actions foreseen for these programs under the Article 14.4, paragraph C. When we are programming the actions under the ISO 1 for these programs, it is also the legal frameworks of the EU external policy which need to be taken into account. Because just as a reminder, these programs are contributing to both EU cohesion policy, both the cooperation goals and objectives, but as well to the EU external policies, the enlargement policy and the ENP, European Neighborhood Policy, and as well the EU-Russia relations. So those draft legal frameworks need to be taken into account. For IPA, it's so-called IPA 3 draft regulation, and for the neighborhood, we have the new instrument, which for the moment is called Neighborhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument, which basically merges several external policy instruments from before. Because we are also in the non-EU countries context, we should also have a look at some documents or reference texts which do not necessarily come directly from the EU legal environment, especially, for example, the work under the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals on governance is very precious, as well as, for example, there are some recommendations made by the Council of Europe, the principles of good governance. They have the advantage that they apply to the same extent in the member states and as well in the non-EU countries. Next slide, please. The actions under the better Interreg governance, or better cooperation governance rather, for the EU external borders should not, of course, be programmed in the void. We should take into account what has been done in the past. For example, for the ENI CBC programs, they have been investing in actions under the thematic objective 5. Which should have supported, or which supports local and regional good governance. And the ENI CBC programs should also take into account the results of the so-called result-oriented monitoring, which was done the last year. There are very valid points on how also actions under governance in these programs are tackled. For the IPA programs, they have had a specific thematic priority as well in the menu of their support for the current programs, which was also supporting the local and regional governments, but also enhancing the capacities of the local and regional authorities. Needless to say that, that all the activities which are supported should be complementary to those which are already supported by our colleagues in DG NEAR in their bilateral support for the neighborhood policy and the enlargement policy. We would like to have a specific emphasis, however, on namely improving the capacities of the regional and local authorities, because it has been proven that those are key for delivering the public services for the citizens in their regions, in the border regions. So therefore, we should really enhance the regional and local authorities and improve their capacities. For the partner countries and non-EU countries, it is also very important to empower the local communities. This should be perceived as one way of how to enhance the democratic institutions, which is indeed the specific type of actions which should be promoted under these programs. Building trust, support to the democratic institutions, support to rule of law and democracy. And last but not least, the EU external policies are very strong on civil society participation, because this is as well foreseen as an essential feature and added value of these programs. Next slide, please. We are moving into the last category of programs which we would like to cover by the presentation today, and this is the cooperation programs in the outermost regions. Next slide, please. It's no surprise that outermost regions are a very specific category of regions among those supported. They have a different kind of issues and challenges which they need to tackle under the EU programs that they support. They have long distances. They are remote. They need to deal with the many natural disasters and so on and so forth. At the same time, there was a communication in 2017, a stronger and renewed strategic partnership with the EU's outermost regions, which also lists and lists the actions on the governance as well, which can be supported, and it also explains very well what are the specificities of the programs and of the outermost regions as such. The legislator and the draft legal framework now foresees that outermost regions cooperation programs are covered under the new strand, so-called Strand B. And the reason for that is that the programs supported are indeed of a hybrid nature. They cover both cross-border cooperation and transnational cooperation aspects. So all these specificities should be taken into account when programming the actions under the ISO 1 for outermost regions. The last slide, please. So just before concluding on what kind of actions should be supported under the cooperation programs in the outermost regions, it's again the whole range of activities foreseen for both internal and external cross-border cooperation programs, but also transnational cooperation programs. But there can be also some specific actions, such as support to the hosting platforms between European Development Fund and ERDF and other specific actions. So that was all from me. Thank you very much. I hand over back to, I think, Nathalie.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Simona. Thank you very much, Ricardo and Olivier. I think you did a very good job, a very comprehensive presentation. And if I can have the next slide, I will swiftly then conclude this recording by reminding you of some key messages. You can, I think, hear from what we have been explaining that ISO 1 is extremely important to us. It's pretty central to Interreg post 2020. It will, in our with our intention, is really that it has an impact on cross-border, transnational, macro-regional, external borders, and outermost regions, because it should tackle some very structural issues that appear, which, if they are solved, can really make a big impact on socioeconomic and territorial cohesion in all these border regions. So I won't repeat what the colleague said, but we have a small budget for this, but we expect a very, very high impact on the various strands of Interreg. I maybe did not stress enough in my first introduction the notion of capacity building. For us, it's also extremely important that we use ISO 1 effectively to support all sorts of actors of cooperation, whether cross-border or transnational, to become more competent and better equipped for sustainable cooperation and long-term cooperation in the future, by making sure that the governance structures that exist are strengthened, or that new governance structures that emerge are also supported. And my final slide would be to say that the regulation is words, but behind the words are real intentions and concrete intentions. And we wanted to finish by maybe sharing with you some of the low-hanging fruit, as we call them, that we could expect to reap during the next programming period. For instance, this inventory of obstacles that Ricardo mentioned, 230 obstacles are identified in there. Some are already obsolete, but new ones I'm sure have appeared. This is definitely something that Interreg could get its teeth into and resolve. Also, the 43 cases under the B-Solution initiative, sometimes it requires a next step that indeed could be financed under Interreg programs. And then the 4 macro-regional strategies are also existing structures where we think that we can see a very quick improvement if ISO 1 again is used effectively. So this is to finish on a more concrete note. On behalf of D1 and D2, I would wish to thank you for your attention and for watching this video, and I'm very much looking forward to the exchange we will have in June during the question and answer session. Over to you, Bernhard.
Thank you, Nathalie. Thank you, Simona. Thank you, Olivier. Thank you, Ricardo. I think it's the fascinating range of offers under this specific objective. I mean, from daily annoyances of ticketing in public transport to partnership talks in the outermost parts of the European Union. I would say everything is possible, and governance matters, of course. So same from our side, happy that we were able, with your help, to provide, let's say, very comprehensive explanations to what's possible, very illustrative, and just we will help to take care of all the questions coming up with these explanations. Thanks a lot from our side. Thanks.